Welcome to Pathways to Paradise. I'm Samson Reiny, your guest host for today's show, and the topic is homelessness. It's a visible problem in Hawaii, in our parks, on our beaches, the hidden homeless, families scrunched up, living with other families in small houses and apartments. And certainly many of them make our way into our homeless shelters and services. And certainly with the economy floundering and the state government being financially insolvent, this problem is magnified from many different angles. And I'm also happy to have Dr. Michael Ullman on our show today. He has worked as researcher, administrator, and consultant for 10 years, both in North Carolina and Hawaii. He has worked for the Institute for Human Services as well as U.S. Vets. He just received his doctorate in social welfare at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. And he is self-described as annoyingly helpful and known to many as grant writer extraordinaire. He has raised $50 million for funding for Hawaii's homeless services. So thank you, Michael, for joining me today.
Sure, thanks, Samson. Well, the annoyingly helpful is a self-described moniker. In terms of the amount of money, yeah, over the years, I mean, working with the organizations that I had, I've worked on grants that probably have equaled that or surpassed it. Certainly with IHS and U.S. Vets, and I've actually helped write a number of large grants for the federal government with the city and county and the state. So again, thanks for having me on. A lot of people usually don't like to have me talk that much in public because I'm a little bit of a pariah in homeless services because I don't toe the normal party line about what the problems and solutions and some of the issues are. So hopefully we can talk about a few of those today.
Definitely. This is something that I think is of interest to anyone watching. We always hear about homelessness in the newspaper. We see it on TV, and it's very cursory. And I don't think people get the full extent of what's happening, what the challenges are. And hopefully with your experience, you can start by telling us how you feel that what people don't understand about homeless services in Hawaii that is important to know.
Sure. Yeah, that's one of my things is to talk about what you really don't get from the papers. I mean, the papers do focus on, some of the problems, which certainly are there, and some of the solutions, or some of the solutions that are being implemented. Although too often I think maybe the public thinks that the problem only gets worse and worse and worse without really getting any better. And one of the confusing things is just because there's economic downturns or recessions, they don't necessarily, they impact homelessness in a different way than a lot of people think, depending on the households and the individuals. Just because we currently have an economic recession, actually it hasn't really impacted homelessness. In fact, sometimes it helps a little bit because when there's an economic boom, it does raise the price of housing a lot. So sometimes that is more problematic for some households than others. Again, it's not a one-to-one relationship. I mean, people don't lose their job and become homelessness. It doesn't happen like that. And the economy doesn't get good and everybody doesn't become homeless, nor does the economy get bad and everybody becomes homelessness. So people should kind of, disabuse themselves of that kind of direct relationship, for one. So
okay, so you mentioned that the economic malaise that's happening isn't increasing homelessness at the level that people might think it is. What is at the root of homelessness, aside from this economic?
Sure. And again, this is where I kind of have, I've done a lot of research, and I just got a PhD, so you use the word doctor. I'm not going to really use that word, but when it helps to use it for credential purposes, sure, I'll use it. A lot of people talk about, there's the people side of the problem, like people homeless because they didn't do this, or they're a drug addict, or they're this, or they're that, and then there's the macroeconomic side, which is everybody has lots of those problems, but the problem is they can't afford housing, something. So there's kind of that, the macro part, the macroeconomic, and then the individual related. And in a sense, to me, that's not really, those are risk categories for those people who may become homeless. Because there's always solutions to all those people. For instance, most people who are mentally ill, who are drug addicts, aren't homeless. So, and most people who have economic problems or poor aren't homeless either. And just because housing conditions are really, really expensive, that doesn't mean everybody's homeless, nor where in areas where housing is cheap. I mean, unless you have free housing, maybe that would be perhaps the only true test. So for me, actually, the better way to think about what the reason is for homelessness, and this is part of my personal kind of growing research that I'll be doing, is homelessness is better thought of as being created by, you have low-income households who in general are susceptible because they have both not that much income and usually not that many different types of social support, because their family and friends may also have low income or may also be in housing situations where they can't help them out. So the way to think about it is that homelessness gets created by the formation of new low-income households, whether they be one-person households or five-person households or three-person households. And when that household tries to make it on its own and isn't able to because of income reasons, because of drug reasons, because of conflict reasons, they get left out. I mean, again, if you think about it this way, and this is key to why a lot of the solutions that they've tried to implement over the last 20 or 30 years really hasn't worked, because we've always had homelessness, but in the Great Depression or years before that, the United States was still a very poor country. So that's kind of just, there is an infrastructure, and people would just kind of live on the land or live in trains and stuff like that. But since the 70s, despite some recessions, it is a pretty wealthy country, unevenly wealthy perhaps, but still wealthy. So, and we have had a fair amount of housing projects, so why hasn't that created it? And but again, you have to look at the creation of, and I'll explain this further in a little bit, the creation of new low-income households from other low-income households. And then when you do that, then you can look at like disability and macroeconomic policies that will influence whether those households will be able to make it. But so then you have to look at the policies that create low-income households out of other low-income households. And actually, one of the biggest ones is the federal housing policy, which is mainly public housing and Section 8. And this is an area that there is almost no research on. And this is an area particularly interested in me because I actually came out of an interest in public housing before I got into homelessness. I sat on the City of Chapel Hill, North Carolina Public Housing Association before I kind of got into homelessness. But I'll let you follow up.
So this isn't just a Hawaii problem. This same phenomena is a federal problem that happens in every major city.
It happens in every major city. Hawaii, like all states, has their unique issues. So I would say in Hawaii we have the same issues as everybody else, since we have public housing, since we certainly have individuals with substance abuse, individuals with serious mental illness, and families who are low income, whether they be one-parent or two-parent families. Now there's two distinct issues in Hawaii, and that actually is not really focused on that much in the media, because these are kind of, political, hot potato kind of issues. And I always tell people when they say, what's going on in homelessness, especially family homelessness, I always tell them there's really only two population segments that experience a large amount of homelessness among families in Hawaii, and that's Native Hawaiian or part Native Hawaiian families, and families who are coming from the Compact of Free Association nations, which is Micronesia and Marshall Islands and Palau, but there's not that many people that come in from Palau. So if you look at the statistics actually from 1990 on, the last 20 years, the amount of homeless families, for instance, out of the other communities, whether the Asian community, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino population, Caucasians to some extent, and the different communities, that's actually been relatively stable, and it's been relatively low. But the Native Hawaiian population and the quote Micronesian population, those have been the growing populations of family homelessness and to some extent single homelessness. And they're related to the same issues, because all of it is related to that same issue of the formation of new low-income families out of already low-income families. So especially with the Micronesian families and Native Hawaiians, because we talk a lot about Ohana, whether it's with Native Hawaiians or new immigrant families here, and that's part of it. I mean, the part of it is if you're low income, you kind of have to keep together and live doubled up or live in a large house where you can have multiple earners kind of help pay the rent. Mm-hmm. And then when you start splitting up because you don't want to, because there's a public housing opportunity, because there's a shelter, that's when you can actually create homelessness. And that's the problem of public policy when it meets the road.
So the federal policy, in short, what improvements, well, first of all, what is the problem with the public housing, how the federal government goes about it, and what do you think needs to be done?
Right. Aside from the issues that's been in the media a lot about the poor conditions in public housing, I mean, that's separate, having a building where the elevators don't work and the whole place smells like urine, that's disgusting. And the fact that the state has kind of let that on for years and years is horrible. And, a lot of people still need to be held accountable for that, including the HPHA board, which seems to be absolved of any accounting of that. But the main problem of public housing is, and I've seen it time and time again, is if you're in public housing, well, let's put it this way, if you're a low-income person, especially in the old days, whether it's in the old days, I'm from kind of the South, in the 1930s or 40s, or in the old days in Hawaii, which maybe is the 50s, if somebody needs help, they come and live in your place, and they still do that to some extent. In public housing, that's the one thing that you can't do. So the way it distorts, the way public housing is very anti-family is if you get public housing, by law, you are not legally allowed to let somebody stay at your place doubled up. And even if you have another individual who could join the family, they would then have to be put on the lease, and then it may increase your lease payment. So the one thing that poor families used to always have, whether they had their own houses or whether even they rented, is they could extend that resource to their friends and families who also maybe tended to be low income too. With public housing and also with Section 8, you can't do that. And while it may be an economic issue and nobody likes to see people doubled up, this is kind of the natural progression of the way people do things. And I think the best way to look at it is to compare the Filipino population here. I'm not an expert in the Filipino community, but I do know some of the basic statistics, which most people kind of know anecdotally. Filipinos have very low family homelessness. I mean, it's residual, and some of those families are kind of mixed too. Not that it's related to their ethnicity, but and Filipinos also have very low income per capita, but they traditionally have a lot of earners in their family, right. So they don't use the welfare system as much, and they make sure that if there's poor families that they have 3 or 4 earners that are all living together in larger houses. So again, whether it's that way or the way Hawaiians do it, on both around town, that kind of works. When you have policies like public housing where you're giving the poor family a resource, but you're saying you cannot use that one resource to help your other people. If you got rid of that, you would instantly see homelessness decrease by probably 1/3. You'd have a lot of people, piled up in living rooms, but, that's an economic issue. That's not homelessness.
So, Michael, we focused on the federal aspect, and that's very much a part of the cause. But now let's shift gears to the state and the homeless shelters here, how they're dealing with those resulting problems. What's working right now with what the homeless shelters are doing and the services?
Right. No, that's good. Because there's a lot of things that are working, and there's a lot of information that people don't know. One of the things that is working has certainly been a number of federal programs. Well, one in particular called Shelter Plus Care, which is targeted mainly for chronically homeless people who are seriously mentally ill. And these are individuals that do have a prognosis of not having much income over the rest of their lifetime. Most of them are on SSI, which is a federal benefit that you get about $650 these days. And that's been working. I mean, over the last, I would say, 8 years since that program started, both the island of Oahu, as well as the state of Hawaii, we now have about 400 vouchers. And they're kind of akin to basically Section 8 for chronically homeless or seriously mentally ill, or some other disability categories. So that has specifically gotten a lot of people out of the shelters and off the streets into their own place.
And Michael, how long is that? How long is that voucher last?
The voucher is actually a lifetime voucher.
Wow.
I mean, like all funding, the funding theoretically could end at any time, but so could Section 8 and public housing. And most people, what happens is for them, most people stay on the voucher until they get onto a permanent subsidy like public housing or Section 8. So, but that is a portion of the homeless population who do generally need this kind of lifetime support, and that's the way this society has been set up. I mean, a lot of that population in other decades would have just been sequestered in the state mental hospital, but now we don't do that. So.
And so those are the individuals. I know we also have the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program. Do you see it being as successful? The challenges, I mean, I think it's just a one-time thing, right? They'll either pay for a deposit or...
Right.
How successful has that been?
Yeah, and I think we met, actually. The first time we met was when we were working together on some of the housing assistance programs.
Right.
And that's actually one of the big initiatives, one of the first big initiatives for homeless services from the Obama administration's kind of their fiscal surge, as I like to call it, to try to help the economy, is more money and about for homeless assistance or emergency rental assistance. The city and county of Honolulu is getting $4 million that will start being able to be used September 1st. And that's actually, people should know that, because sometimes there's a lot of people who are low income who are in the pipeline for this knowledge, but these funds are open to anybody who meets the criteria of low income, even if they've never been homeless before. So there is money, and there will continue to be money for the next couple of years to kind of help pay for first month's rent and deposit, or if somebody's had a job and because of the economy kind of lost it, but they need just kind of temporary assistance for one or for a couple months, this will be able to do it. And those programs are fine. They don't really address homelessness. I mean, they help a little bit in terms of just some money, but those kind of one or two kind of month programs usually are just, I think of them as appropriate but low income funds.
So go as you will where you want with this, to any aspect of what's not working with either the shelters or the services, or is the support there? Is there enough support, as in counseling, behind getting the funds to help these people succeed in the long run? Any kind of sense from you of what needs to be fixed?
Yeah, I mean, most people know that I'm after having worked for an emergency shelter, and actually in North Carolina I worked a little bit of an emergency shelter too. To me, what doesn't work is emergency shelters. I mean, they don't work for seriously mentally ill individuals, they don't work for families, and they don't really work for anybody. I mean, because there's no, homeless people, their one commonality is they have housing instability problems. Especially, again, like I say, because we have all these housing policy things which prevents other people from helping them legally. So the reason why they don't work is, it's kind of silly. I mean, to me, it's kind of backwards, because the one thing that these people suffer from is housing instability. And they come into a shelter, an emergency shelter, or even a transitional shelter, and the first thing almost they're told after saying, welcome and have something to eat is, you're going to have to leave in a little bit of time. So my thing is, why are we spending, tons of money either on support services each year or building new shelters that make people still be homeless? I mean, if people who are living on the street, come into a place, especially a place that the people, the government, which means the people, your tax dollar, paid for, that's where they can be, and they can pay an amount of money. Most homeless individuals and households do have money. Some of them that don't, which is a lot of the seriously mentally ill population. That's fine. There can be some waivers and stuff, but emergency shelters kind of, they build dependence on the people. First of all, and some of them are changing. IHS is changing a little bit, not as fast as I'd like to see, but there's certain aspects. Emergency shelters, people prepare food and give it to them. Certainly the families are all more than able to prepare their own food. In fact, they usually don't even eat that much there, and then they just go off to McDonald's or Jack in the Box and eat food. Emergency shelters, because of the way they're set up, they have to tell people when they can go to the bathroom, when they can do this, when they can do that, and it costs a lot of money to do that. So this whole idea of these congregate shelters, that's old. It's a failed solution, and the city and the state should be looking to get rid of them as soon as possible, and to transform them. That doesn't mean, I used to work at IHS. That doesn't mean to get rid of IHS. Mm-hmm. That means to have IHS and Next Step, and I think there's one or two more, and some stuff on the neighbor islands, is to convert those to apartments. I mean, anybody that comes in who needs a place to stay, as soon as they come into a place, they should be in a place they're not homeless anymore. They're in a place. I mean, when you get a rental lease, it's only for a year. So what's kind of the difference? So, and they can have their own place. Maybe they can have a room that's shared with a couple people. I mean, there's a lot of women still living at IHS. I say, build a place, for those same women, but just have it like a boarding house or a dorm room or something where they have a lock and a key, and then they're not homeless.
And this would be something
where they can pay a small amount.
This would be something where, while they're there, they could receive other services, employment, training, things like that.
Yeah, that's my other thing is and that's all fine. And I always tell people, knock yourself out. The job of homeless services or housing, can't be to fix families. If you want to fix families, pretty much that's the job of DHS. And that's been one of the problems of HUD versus DHS. And one of the things that HUD has tried to get away from is let's house people, and we can fix families or help families improve, strengthen, as we like to say. Fix families probably annoys everybody when I say that. And that's why I said I'm annoyingly helpful. But yeah, so if people can do that, that's fine. And the same thing with employment. I always tell people, look, I'm from an upper middle class family. I have lots of friends who are in and out of work. Employment and homelessness is also not a direct line. People who have scattered employment, they just need to figure out how to live either off the system or off somebody else and not become homeless. So all those things are great, but they don't have to be there to reduce homelessness, And a lot of employment programs, they aren't necessarily proved to be that effective. Some of them help the people who are going to be helped anyway.
So Michael, I want to shift gears a bit to your artistic endeavors. I hear you've created and authored a musical called Truly Dooley. I'd like you to talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure. A little bit non-controversial. I appreciate bringing it up. And Truly Dooley was written during the time that I was working at IHS as director of programs, and it wasn't meant to be kind of as much of a debating policy, but the musical was created to kind of explain some of the basic issues about homelessness, especially chronic homelessness among people with dual diagnosis. So Truly Dooley comes from dually diagnosed. Dually diagnosed in the mental health field means that they both have mental illness, serious mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, a major depression, and substance abuse.
And where can we see, is there going to be a future outlet for this work or upcoming shows?
Sure. About a year ago, we actually had more. There's been 4 sets of shows on the islands. It was originally done in 2005, and then we did some shows. We did a special show a little bit later in that year. Then we did some shows. The Kona Clubhouse was interested in doing some shows because the mental health community actually likes it more than the homeless community. But that's another that's another discussion. So we had some shows there, and then we actually did a set of shows about a year ago for IHS's 30th anniversary.
Okay.
Since it was based on my experiences at IHS, and at the time also it linked in with the 30th anniversary of Father Dutiel founding IHS. And again, I'm a supporter of IHS. I just would like to see them evolve a little bit more. And then we're not planning any more shows. And I think we've kind of done enough shows in Hawaii, but I'm excited to see that we are going to do some shows on the mainland. We're doing some shows with the, right now I also work for, as you mentioned, the United States Veterans Initiative, which is a nonprofit. It sounds like a government agency, but it's a nonprofit, a little bit of a modestly sized national nonprofit. And we have 10 sites around the country, and one of them is Las Vegas.
And you're moving to take your job?
Well, I'm moving to the East Coast, so at the same time we're actually going to have a few shows in Las Vegas, and then we're actually going to, a church and a homeless emergency shelter actually wanted to do a show in Virginia, which will actually be near where I am. But since I'm moving to the Baltimore, Washington area, hopefully we'll do some shows there. It's a great musical. It's not, it's for all ages and people love it. And I always have to mention that it wouldn't have been possible without my co-composer Rosalind Catraccia, who worked on the original music with me. So
oh, great!
It plays on Olelo still. On I think they still have the tapes, and they still play it occasionally during Homeless Awareness Week. So,
well, Michael, it's been a very quick show, and I feel like we've only touched on a few things that we really wanted to get more in depth with. But I wish you luck on the mainland as you pursue your career, and hopefully you'll continue to keep in touch, and we can probably do this again some other time.
Right, and maybe we'll bring a show to Berkeley since you're still doing your graduate studies there.
Yes, that would be nice. That would be really nice.
Yeah.